What if I told you that Hamilton's car and Ferrari could have been defective from day one, and that no one noticed so far? Is this an internal sabotage or the greatest technical failure of the modern era? It all started with a series of details that, isolated, might seem inconsequential. But when observing them together, something did not square. From his first round on SF25, Lewis Hamilton met a car that did not return what he offered. Each adjustment, each change in the configuration, every attempt to refine the balance of the car ended up in frustration. What seemed like a natural adaptation of a new pilot to a new team was silently, into an internal struggle between pilot and machine. And the most disconcerting was that, while Hamilton fought with an unstable car, Charles Leclerc, his partner, showed a much more predictable and competitive performance. The most alarming difference was noticed in high-speed curves. Under conditions where a Ferrari should feel planted to the asphalt, Hamilton's car seemed to let go. The data began to show a consistent loss of aerodynamic load, particularly in the sections where maximum efficiency of the airflow is required. It was not simple ailer adjustments or pilot errors. The loss was deep, recurring, and manifested irregularly, which made its diagnosis even more difficult. During the Spain Grand Prix, a circuit that punishes any aerodynamic weakness, the Hamilton SF25 behavior became unpredictable. The front axle, vital for fast curves control, reacted with a late and erratic response. This not only compromised the ideal plot but generated irregular wear in the tires, affecting the return after return. For a pilot accustomed to exploiting every millimeter of available adhesion, this was like driving with bandaged eyes. As data accumulated and engineering sessions became more intense, a disturbing hypothesis emerged. The differences were not explained by the usual telemetry or by the simulation in the wind tunnel. They were not adjustment or strategy problems, but something much deeper. A structural defect in the chassis of the 44 car number 44. Some Monegasco pieces could have been manufactured with minimal tolerances out of rank, a deviation almost imperceptible to the naked eye but sufficient to alter the dynamic behavior of the car under maximum load. And this is where Fred Vasseur enters. Ferrari's chief, accustomed to dealing with internal and external pressures, decided to intervene directly. He ordered a complete review of Hamilton's SF25, piece by piece, comparing it in detail with the Leclerc car. What they discovered was disturbing. A series of small accumulated irregularities that, combined, generated a butterfly effect inside the car. What seemed like a slight inaccuracy was extended at high speed, destabilizing the car in critical moments. The most disconcerting was the intermittent character of the failure. It was not always presented in the same way or under the same conditions. Sometimes the car responded as expected. In others, it became uncontrollable. This took the diagnosis weeks, even with all Ferrari technology available. It was a situation as technical as psychological. Because while the team tried to find answers, Hamilton had to continue driving a car that betrayed him without prior notice. An invisible struggle that moved him away from his best version and left him exposed on an increasingly competitive grill. This was the breakdown. The moment when Ferrari understood that the problem was not to adapt the pilot or strategy or failed simulations. It was a critical anomaly in the Hamilton car unit. And this discovery changed everything. From that moment on, a new chapter for Ferrari opened in 2025. One where the challenge was not only to beat Red Bull or McLaren, but to rebuild from the inside a car that, silently, had been sabotaging one of the best pilots of all time. Formula One, more than a pilot war, is an engineering war. And what Ferrari discovered in Hamilton's SF25 forced to change his narrative from the root. It was no longer about understanding why the heptacampion was not found, but to assume that the car had failed in such a critical aspect that completely modified its track behavior. The anomaly was not theoretical, it was tangible. And that finding pushed Ferrari to make decisions that they would never have considered in a normal season. The first was to accept that it was not a global defect of the SF25, but an isolated and deeply specific case. Leclerc's car worked under the expected parameters, which ruled out a general design problem. The diagnosis then focused on the Hamilton chassis. Microdeformations, small structural mismatches that accumulated, altered the dynamics of the car without conventional sensors could detect it constantly. These deviations created inconsistencies in the front wing response and an obvious disconnection between the suspension and the Lewis pilot style. This implied a complete approach change. Ferrari had to admit that his quality manufacturing and control process, despite the rigorous Maranello standards, had allowed a defective car to reach the track. The most worrying thing was not only the technical error, but the difficulty to replicate it in simulator conditions or in wind tunnel tests. The car seemed correct in theory, but in practice it challenged logic. And that contradiction demanded a radical solution. This is where the concept of invisible updates is born. They could not rebuild the entire car in the middle of a season. So the team of engineers, led by Vasseur, devised a plan that attacked the problem from the nervous system of the car. Its electronic brain, its software, its internal algorithms. The first modifications were aimed at the logic of the ERS, the energy recovery system, seeking to soften the power delivery in critical phases of the curve. Then came more sophisticated adjustments, refinement in the motor braking strategy, improvement in traction prediction through electronic differential control, and a specific reprogramming for the deployment of energy in medium straight lines, where the SF-25 lost traction inexplicably. These modifications, although invisible to the viewer's eyes, were decisive to try to return a stable car to Hamilton. Not only did they affect chronometric performance, but the psychological trust of a pilot who no longer knew how his car would respond in the next curve. Vasseur declared to specialized media that not all updates would be visible, and said it with intention. What was happening in Ferrari was an open-hearted technical surgery, a transformation that should be done while the car continued to compete. This change of narrative also had effects within the team. Comparisons between Leclerc and Hamilton, which until then were interpreted under the optics of personal performance, began to be questioned. Was it fair to compare two cars that, in essence, were not the same? To what extent did Hamilton's results were his fault, and not the defective material that had been given to him? These questions not only affected external perception but also internal. In a team where egos, media pressure, and internal policy are always on the verge of collapse, the Hamilton case forced to rethink priorities and recover cohesion in the garage. The damage was already done. But Ferrari could not allow the situation to be repeated. The technical crisis became a mission, restoring lost performance, rebuilding trust with its star pilot, and above all, demonstrating that they could adapt to an unprecedented problem. Because in Formula One, recognizing an error is just the first step. The truly complex is to correct it while the world observes you, race after career. And Ferrari was willing to assume that challenge with an implicit promise, to return to Hamilton not only a competitive car, but a weapon worthy of his talent. The revelation of the technical anomaly in Lewis Hamilton's car not only changed the Ferrari season. He completely redefined the story of his alliance with the seven-time world champion. The project that promised to be the perfect union between the experience of a legendary pilot and the competitive renaissance of the Scuderia was suddenly crossed by a crisis that left the fragilities of both the team and the newly formed link. And now, after having exposed the root of the problem, the question is not only if Ferrari can fix the car, but if Hamilton will decide to wait for them to do so. And it is that for a pilot like Hamilton, whose sensitivity to the wheel has always been one of his great assets, competing with a car that responds erratically is not only a physical challenge, but an emotional wear. Each practice session was patience-proof. Each classification, a battle not only against rivals, but against an unpredictable car. Each race, an internal struggle between what he knew he could do and what the car allowed him to execute. This type of experience erodes the moral of any pilot, even one with as many titles like him. The situation is not only technical, it is also symbolic. Because Ferrari, with all its history and mystical, promised to be the scene of a new epic for Hamilton. But instead of a glorious rebirth, what he found was a nightmare disguised as an opportunity. And now, although the team has recognized the failure and is taking unprecedented measures to solve it, it remains to be seen if it is too late. Because trust, once broken, does not recover with public statements or promises of invisible improvements. It is rebuilt with results, in time, and above all with facts. From Maranello, they ensure that the car is in the process of transformation, that the updates that will change their behavior, and return to Lewis the tool he needs to fight at the tip. But even if this is fulfilled, symbolic damage is already done. The relationship has suffered a deep fracture that will only close if, and only if, the track performance supports the redemption narrative that Ferrari tries to build. Hamilton, meanwhile, has shown professionalism and composure. He has not exposed the team publicly or used the technical failure as an excuse. But their body language, their silences on radios, their evasive responses in post-carrier interviews have revealed an increasing discomfort. You are not here to be part of a reconstruction project. He is here to win. And if Ferrari does not give him the means to do it in the short term, it would not be unreasonable to think that he could evaluate alternatives. The recent history of F1 is full of unexpected movements by frustrated champions. And Hamilton is no exception to that rule. After everything revealed, the question is not simply technical, it is deeply emotional and strategic. Can Ferrari, in the midst of this storm, demonstrate that he has learned from his mistakes? Is it able to correct the course and offer Hamilton a car at the height of his legacy? Because beyond the figures, telemetry graphics and invisible update packages, what is at stake here is much bigger. It is the possibility of writing a new story in Formula One, a story in which the most successful pilot of all time also becomes the savior of the most iconic team of motor racing. That's why I invite you to think about the following. Do you think Ferrari can really recover Hamilton's trust before it's too late?